When I was pregnant with my daughter, the only thing I wanted besides a good night's sleep was a mojito.
Me too! I had never drank a mojito in my life. And when I got pregnant, I was like, I feel like drinking a mojito.
I'm Robin Sussingham, and this is The Zest. Citrus, seafood, Spanish flavor, and Southern charm. The Zest celebrates cuisine and community in the Sunshine State. On today's podcast, producer Dalia Colon gets a lesson in mojito making from the fifth-generation owner of Florida's oldest restaurant, the Columbia. We'll also hear from a prominent food writer about the Tampa Bay area's burgeoning food scene and how relatively cheap real estate makes it all possible. Plus, our cookbook reviewer Janet Keeler talks about the indispensable charms of a real physical cookbook. But first, as the weather warms up, we do have adult beverages on our mind. Craft beer has become a big deal in Florida. In fact, it's one of the top states in the country in terms of economic impact. And brewing has a long history in Tampa. You can find out all about it at the Tampa Bay History Center, which has an exhibit called History by the Pint, Beer and Brewing in Tampa Bay. Rodney Kite Powell is here. He is a historian with the Tampa Bay History Center. Hey, Rodney.
Hi.
So tell me about brewing in Tampa Bay. It started with the Florida Brewing Company in Ybor City in like the 1800s.
It was the Florida Brewing Company, started by Vicente Martinez Ybor, the founder of Ybor City, in 1897. And it was the first brewery in the entire state of Florida.
Was he from Cuba or was he from Spain?
He was from Spain, and so he had a cigar manufacturing business in Havana. He came to Cuba as a fairly young man.
Where he put this brewery, I think, is really interesting because there were springs there, natural springs that had been sacred to Indians, to the Paleo Indians for, I guess,
thousands
millennia.
Of years. Yeah, and that's the government spring, as it came to be called, was not just important for the native people who had lived here, you say for millennia, but for the soldiers at Fort Brooke who first arrived here in the 1820s, and that fort, which was in downtown Tampa, was continuously occupied until the early 1880s, and it was renowned. And so a very natural place to put your brewery, because one of the most important things that goes in beer is the water.
Since he was a Spaniard who had been living in Cuba, identified with Cubans, was there anything different about the way they brewed their beer?
No, as a matter of fact, it was a German beer. It was a lager, because that's the kind of beer that Americans were drinking. And so
that
you
was
look
selling.
At Anheuser-Busch, exactly, it was selling. So that's what Mr. Ybor did, is he, pardon the pun, he tapped the expertise of Germans that were in the country, not necessarily here in Tampa, and brought them here so they would be able to manufacture a high-quality lager.
And their biggest market
was Cuba. When you get outside of the Tampa Bay area, or Tampa at the time, they exported beer to Cuba. They were, at one point, the largest exporter of beer to Cuba. And prior to Prohibition, breweries owned saloons. And so you went to a saloon that was affiliated with Anheuser-Busch or with the Florida Brewing Company. So the Columbia restaurant started out as a saloon for the Florida Brewing Company.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
For the Florida Brewing Company, because they were
Absolutely.
all right there in Ybor City.
Yes.
So Teddy Roosevelt came to town.
He did.
With his Rough Riders.
Yes.
He had a beer from the Florida brewery. You look skeptical.
Well, it's entirely possible. He was here at the right time for that. There's a lot of myths about Roosevelt and others who the timing doesn't even work for. But yeah, the brewery was a year old, and there was a lot of beer being consumed during the summer of 1898 and the build-up to the Spanish-American War.
These were young men getting ready to go off to war.
Absolutely.
I would think they would have a beer.
Oh, my gosh. There were 30,000 young men that were here, not just the Rough Riders, but 30,000 soldiers, and they all were thirsty and looking for that last drink.
So then Prohibition hit in 1918.
Yes.
But Tampa didn't seem to pay much attention to Prohibition at all.
No, and by 1918, most of the state had gone dry, but Tampa certainly had not, because of a variety of factors of our just cultural makeup. largely, though, because of the large immigrant community that we had, there was very little interest in going dry. And so
They called it the wettest dry city in the state or something like that.
Absolutely. It absolutely was. And there's some wonderful examples of that and people doing everything they can to get an elusive drink.
So Florida's history is so intertwined with Cuba's. And Fidel Castro's rise to power kind of caused the Florida brewery, to go under because the U.S. then embargoed Cuba. Mm-hmm. And that really kind of put the kibosh on breweries for a while in Florida.
Well, it was a transition time. You think about the big brands that were growing at that time in the post-war era. We're talking about the 1950s and 1960s. Mm-hmm. They could withstand having one market taken away because they are in dozens of markets. But you have a small brewery with these great connections to Cuba, as you mentioned, that can be really damaging. And so at the same time that one market closes, you have other breweries literally opening up in the same area. You have the opening of the Anheuser-Busch Brewery. You have the Schlitz Brewery. You've got a county, Hillsborough County, that is actively trying to get new industries in the area. And sometimes it's at the expense of those smaller established businesses.
What was the attraction for the big brewing companies? Why did Anheuser-Busch locate in Tampa, a kind of a mid-sized city?
It's about distribution. Beer is about freshness. Being able to deliver a fresh, cold product was really important.
Thanks, Rodney.
Oh, absolutely. It's been a real pleasure.
Rodney Kite Powell is a historian with the Tampa Bay History Center. There's an exhibition called History by the Pint, Beer and Brewing in Tampa Bay. It's there right now. As Rodney mentioned, the Columbia restaurant in Ybor City has been around for a long time. The Hernandez Gonzmart family opened the restaurant in Tampa's historic Ybor City in 1905. And it's the home of some iconic Florida dishes like their Cuban sandwich and 1905 salad. Their mojito is also very popular, and producer Dalia Colon visited the restaurant to find out more.
I'm here at the Columbia restaurant in Ybor City in Tampa, and it's quiet. And that's only because it's not open yet. I'm here with Andrea Gonzmart Williams, fifth generation owner. Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you for being here.
What are we making today?
Today we are making a mojito.
It's 9 a.m., so that's perfect.
It's 5 o'clock somewhere.
You read my mind. All right, let's do this.
A lot of people are intimidated by trying to make a mojito at home or trying to make a sangria at home. But really, once you have the base of it, it's pretty easy. What we do is you got to start with a simple syrup. And we actually boil our simple syrup is equal parts of water and sugar, which gives you that sweetness. And the idea behind making the simple syrup is the sugar will dissolve, obviously, easier into your drink if it's made into a simple syrup. We actually boil our simple syrup with mint in it. So that way you already have that essence of mint, so you don't have so much pressure to have to muddle the mint so hard to get that flavor in. So we've got a pitcher filled with ice and some of our mint simple syrup. And it's pretty simple. You start with any light rum of your choice. We are using Bacardi Superior today. That's what we use in our restaurants right now. But if you want to use something like a spiced rum, or if you want to use a dark rum, there is no wrong choice. Everyone's taste is different, so go with what you want.
Yeah, there's really no wrong rum.
That is very true.
Okay, just go on and pour the whole bottle in there.
Yep.
How many ounces is that? That is
a 200 milliliter. Then we add some sparkling water.
What do you think it is about the mojito? It happens to be my favorite cocktail. And when I was pregnant with my daughter, who's now 7, the only thing I wanted besides a good night's sleep was a mojito.
Me too! I had never drank a mojito in my life. And when I got pregnant, I was like, I feel like drinking a mojito, which is the darndest thing when you're pregnant.
You know what? It's so refreshing. It's so refreshing, especially here in Florida. How popular is the drink here at the restaurant?
It is super popular. It probably comes in second to our sangria, but it is a perfect Florida cocktail.
It is. It's like a little vacation in a glass, and I'm smelling the mint already. Oh, yeah, this is going to be good.
Now, if you don't want to make the simple syrup at home, one trick would be to muddle it with some sugar, because the sugar would actually help break up the mint leaves. So that's a little shortcut in case you're in a rush and you haven't had time to make the simple syrup.
Okay, that's a good tip.
And then, of course, we have to add the lime.
Okay, a good squeeze of lime just with her bare hands. You've done this a time or two.
Yeah, I may have done this in the restaurant and at home a couple times. So we're adding about 2.5 limes. I always say when you're doing it at home, you could always add 1 lime, taste it, because you never know how much juice you're going to get out of a lime. I always drop a couple of the rinds in there. It makes it look pretty.
It does. It's got a nice bright green color, so you'll want to serve it in a clear glass, I would think.
So yes, we serve them in kind of an old-fashioned size glass, but you can put it in any size glass you want. We always garnish it with the mint leaves, with a lime wheel, and here at the restaurant we put a sugarcane stick in it.
Ooh, nice touch. Go ahead and pour it into the glass. Pour one for yourself too, because this one's mine.
Okay, shall we cheers?
I think we should. All right, let's give it a taste.
Nothing better than a mojito at 9 a.m. It is almost the weekend after all.
Duty calls. You know what? It's so refreshing. So what's a good food to pair it with?
It could go with a Cuban sandwich. It could go with a salad. It could go with barbecue. It could go with pizza. It's one of those things, if you like a mojito, it'll go with anything.
That's great. Well, it's going with me. So, Andrea Gonzmart Williams, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
You can find the Columbia Restaurant's mojito recipe on our website, thezestpodcast.com. And Dalia wants everyone to know that although she may have craved a mojito, she did not drink when she was pregnant. Laura Reilly was for many years the restaurant critic for the Tampa Bay Times, and she's a former critic for the San Francisco Chronicle and the Baltimore Sun. She has cooked professionally and is a graduate of the California Culinary Academy. In 2017, she was a Pulitzer and James Beard finalist, a James Beard finalist again last year. And Laura just recently moved to a position at the Washington Post writing about the business of food. She and I were on a panel recently about the international dining scene in the Tampa-St. Pete area, and afterwards, I pulled her aside to ask a few questions. We want to talk about the dining culture in Tampa Bay and Tampa, St. Petersburg, this whole area. It's changed so dramatically. Your dining guide, you said in your new dining guide, I've expanded our dining guide to nearly 100 restaurants. It's a reflection of what many national magazines seem to have breathlessly concluded in recent months. Tampa Bay is increasingly one of the country's more exciting dining destinations. So yay.
Absolutely. And there's some really good reasons for that. I think that when you're in a market with really expensive real estate, for years I covered restaurants in Silicon Valley and, Palo Alto, places that were enormously expensive to launch a restaurant. So you needed a lot of money, you needed to borrow a lot of money, and you needed to have a business model that was conservative, that had a kind of a track record. You weren't doing anything that was super outside the box. And I think that when you are in a market, if you look at the food markets around the country that have emerged as exciting and novel and that people want to do destination travel to because of the food, it's second-tier cities where there's still affordable real estate. So, if you can, I think a lot of times if you look at the most exciting restaurants that have happened here in the Tampa Bay area, a lot of them are not corporate, they're not replicable, they're restaurants started by an individual or a couple, often by maxing out their credit cards, by borrowing a little bit from mom and dad. They don't have a panel of kind of angel investors who plunk down $1 million a piece and expect certain kind of metrics, So it's a little bit more of a iconoclastic, seat of the pants approach to starting a business. And I think because of that, you get more variation, more novelty, some things that are a little unexpected.
So before food started getting attention, restaurants started getting attention in this area, people started paying attention to the Tampa Bay area because of its craft beer scene really picking up. And you've talked about that.
Yeah, I think that Joey Redner started Cigar City, I think in 2007. And pretty swiftly, a whole bunch of hobbyist beer makers from around the Tampa Bay area said to Joey, "Hey, I want to work there. I'll just volunteer. And so he got a real kind of strong and avid following at Cigar City, and became regional and then national. And then he really did kind of launch the career of a whole bunch of other brewers in this area. And he allowed them to, the thing about moving from craft, home brewing to commercial brewing, it's a scaling issue, as it is in so many businesses. It's really hard to scale because the equipment is so different. And he was gracious enough to let a lot of people use his equipment and to try a bigger batch and to experiment with styles. So I think that he brought attention to his brewery from around the country, but then he also launched the career of lots of other people, and that in turn caused a lot of beer enthusiasts from around the country to start looking at the Tampa Bay area as a serious market that really was ambitious and trying some new styles and maybe not working in a particularly narrow paradigm. I think that that's something that's been interesting about the Tampa Bay area's beer scene, is that it's incredibly varied in terms of style and, Goza and sour beers and, the kind of the IPA mania. So it's been interesting to watch. And definitely, I think for a lot of people, beer is the gateway drug to food, that you get interested in beer. Maybe you're a young guy, you're out of college and you don't want to drink Budweiser anymore. And so you kind of get into craft beer and you realize, wow, there are all these different flavors going on here. And it kind of sparks your interest in food at a higher level. So I think oftentimes those go hand in hand.
You mentioned that one of the problems with having a good dining culture in the Tampa Bay area may have been the lack of a reputable culinary program.
Yeah, I think that is something that has been a real problem here forever, as long as I've been in this market. I mean, if you're in Chicago or DC or Northern California or LA or whatever, there are 2-year accredited, either they're an associate's degree or sometimes bachelor's programs that immediately you have a whole bunch of fresh-faced young people who you can have in the back of your kitchen. And we have not really had that. I mean, we have some really emerging high school programs and some culinary programs where you can get an associate's degree, but they're
college.
they're not tremendously well thought of yet, and they don't have a tremendous track record of placing people in great kitchens. So you need a critical mass of good restaurants that actually do invite people to come and stage. I mean, that's when you come and, whether it's an unpaid internship or a very modestly paid internship, you come to the kitchen and you spend a month and you start wherever they put you, in garde-manger or peeling veggies or that kind of thing, and you kind of learn on the job. That's a real, that kind of internship type approach is a very strong one in the professional kitchen, and we have not had that tradition here so much, and it's changing. I mean, I think there are restaurants like the Refinery or Rooster in the Till where people from other parts of the country will come and do a stage in those kitchens, and then hopefully in a good food market, those people then peel off when they've learned enough and are chafing a little bit working under someone. They don't want to work for the man anymore. And then they go off and they start their own thing, whether that's a food truck that ends up being a brick and mortar or just some very modest brick and mortar to begin with. I think that's how you start having a critical mass of exciting restaurant culture.
And we've seen chefs from New York City in the last few years start restaurants in St. Petersburg or Tampa. Noel Cruz of Ichikoro is one that you know pretty well. What was his reasoning for moving from Manhattan to Tampa? I
think that when I talk to chefs from other markets who've come here to set up shop, some of it is that other places are so competitive. I mean, I think that we all feel that way a little bit, just in terms of our own life choices. Sometimes a big urban center where everything is hard and getting your groceries and your dry cleaning and rents are high and it's super competitive to get attention. I think there's something appealing about moving to a slightly calmer, quieter, less hysterical environment to do what you do. I think, if we look at people like Jessica and Lauren at the Reading Room, they were in Asheville working under someone else, and they wanted to start their own place, and they were thinking about Asheville, but it was a pretty heated market. So to get the kind of attention and the customer base that you want, it's hard to do right off the bat. And I think we still have enough available real estate at a price point that is an entry-level price point here that has drawn a lot of attention from restaurateurs around the country.
Thanks for being here, Laura.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Despite the arrival of ebooks, actual paper cookbooks are a star of the publishing world. There are so many to choose from, but how do we decide which to invest in? Our cookbook reviewer, Janet Keeler, talks about the qualities that make some stand out from the pack. Janet teaches journalism at USF St. Pete, is the founder and coordinator of the Graduate Food Writing and Photography Certificate Program, and the former food editor at the Tampa Bay Times. And she's the author of Cookielicious, 150 Fabulous Recipes to Bake and Share. Janet also is a cookbook reviewer and the cookbook columnist for the Zest. Hey, Janet.
Hi, thank you for having me. I love to sit here and talk to you about cookbooks.
So, 5 years ago, we would have bet that cookbooks were on their way out because there was this thing called the e-cookbook. It's really inexpensive. It's fast. You can download it when you feel like it and you have it. You really would have thought, well, what are people going to want to pay for these hardback, expensive, heavy cookbooks? But the fact is that cookbooks are doing really well in the publishing world. I mean, they're a success story. What do you think it is?
Well, it is a success story. I think cookbooks in 2018 outsold cookbooks in 2017, which is phenomenal when you think about it. And everybody talked about, well, we're going to be looking at stuff on our devices. We're going to be looking at cookbooks on our phones or tablets or whatever. And I do that sometimes, and I bring them into the kitchen, and I do that now that I'm not afraid to wreck them. But I do sometimes have like goo on my hands, and then I've got, the screen goes away, and then I got to go back. And, so it's slightly cumbersome. It's not a really great way to cook, though I do look for recipes online.
Do you find that I'll look for recipes online and I'll make it and it'll be great, and then I won't remember later where I found it, or I won't be able, if I don't print it out, which kind of defeats the purpose, I can never remember where I got that recipe from, whereas a cookbook is right there and you can turn to page 50 and you've got the page turned down and you've got your fingerprints all over it and the olive oil splashed on it, and you know where to find that recipe.
Well, it's funny that you bring that up, because I do that often. I'm notorious for doing that. I find the recipe, I make it, and then I never can find it again. Was it here? Was it there? Where was it? Yeah. You mentioned how you can mark a cookbook with the dog-eared page or the splatters or something. I think that's one thing that's really, really charming about cookbooks, is the ones that are used show you they've been used. If you ever inherit cookbooks from anybody and you open those, those splattered pages are everything.
Oh, what if you see your grandmother's note, that she halved the sugar or something like that. I don't know. There's something really special about it. And the photography often is beautiful. Sometimes to me they look more like coffee table books than cookbooks. They are beautiful. I'm thinking especially of the Yotam Ottolenghi books. I think are gorgeous.
Right. And I also think for me, a cookbook, it represents inspiration. I love a cookbook that inspires me to get into the kitchen. And I don't get that so much online. Online, I'm like, what am I going to make tonight? I have chicken, I have this, and I have a few other things. What can I make? Or some sort of quick thing. But if I really want to sit down and plan something, a cookbook provides inspiration for me. So that I think is one of the characteristics that you don't get so much online. There's some great websites, but a cookbook really does that. You can sit with it in your lap and really kind of delve into it.
And the cookbooks provide stories.
Yes. Right. I think that's really true. I did a little crowdsourcing on a Facebook page I belong to. Just asked, what do you guys, what do you look for in a cookbook? Got about 50 replies, and I would say stories came up at least 75% of the time.
Wow.
People really resonate with that.
So glad to know I hit on something there. So that is something I did want to talk to you about. What do you look for in a cookbook? There's a lot out there right now.
Well, it's interesting. What you look for in a cookbook can change over the years. When I was much younger and single and dated a guy who would eat anything, could spend all Saturday cooking. And if it took me 5 or 6 stores to get the ingredients for this very involved recipe, I had no problem doing that.
You had the time.
Yeah, I had the time. And over the years, I sort of lost that time. And so I tend to now look for cookbooks where when I look at them, well, first of all, photographs. And I need photographs. And that's when I on this Facebook page, that's what almost everybody said. They have to have photos. I sort of want to see how it's going to look.
What it should look like.
Yeah, what you're aiming for,
right.
Which, of course, is a little deceiving because, they have stylists and cooks and prop people and all kinds of fantastic photography. So sometimes your version doesn't really look like that. But at least I kind of get an idea. Mm-hmm. But that does create the inspiration for me. Oh, that's really neat. That looks great. I'm going to try that. Then I really look at the ingredients list. Like, okay, can I get this stuff? Is it around here? Am I going to have to go to 5 stores? Am I going to have to mail order something? Now, maybe I want to do that. If it's a big holiday meal, maybe I want to think that far in advance, but a lot of times I don't. So I'm just looking for things. Would my family eat this? Can I make it in a decent amount of time? So what I look for in a cookbook kind of changes over time.
Yeah, so it has to sort of fit your own personal lifestyle and preferences.
They want to know, now the people on the Facebook page, all of them said well-tested recipes. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure how well you can tell that when you're at the bookstore thumbing through a cookbook. But I think for me, the publisher is a good publisher should ensure that that's happening. I think that's why a lot of people like cookbooks from celebrities too.
I was going to ask you that. So if you see a cookbook from a celebrity, I guess you would assume, say, Joanna Gaines. Mm-hmm. I mean, her cookbook's gone gangbusters.
Right.
You kind of assume that the publisher wouldn't let that come out with some bad recipes in it. They're going to protect that celebrity.
Right. But the Washington Post just did a story on that cookbook, Magnolia Table, about, it was the best-selling cookbook of 2018, and how come it didn't get much press, which is sort of interesting. It's sold like 1 million copies already, and that's kind of unheard of.
So why didn't it?
I think because of a couple reasons. Well, they tested some recipes and they didn't turn out very well, so that's kind of interesting. It's not a cookbook that gets a lot of attention. Well, we'll see in award season, cookbook award season, when that comes. It probably won't get to that level. I think there's a little bit of she's a lifestyle person that came to fame on HGTV with the Fixer Upper show, and there's a little bit, I think, well, what does she know about cooking? To write a cookbook. I think there's a little bit of feeling.
That sounds like snobbery to me.
Oh, there can be a little bit of that, and food media can be a little bit like that. I know because I was in it for 15 years. It could be a little bit like, well, who's that? Christy Teigen's another one with her Cravings cookbooks. And I was like that at first. I thought, well, what does she know about cooking? She's a model. But then I looked at him and I thought, there's a heck of a fun story there.
Yeah.
Whoever she's working with, and I imagine they all work with somebody. They're not probably writing every word of these cookbooks by themselves, but there's a neat story there, and the recipes are fun in that cookbook. So that's an interesting issue with the celebrities. You can look at people like Ree Drummond, the Pioneer Woman, or Ina Garten.
Or I was thinking of, Trish Yearwood,
right?
Who's got a show,
right?
I mean, so she must know something about cooking because she's got her cooking show,
right? So somehow that, I think, maybe gives it more credence in the food media's mind. I mean, they're actually on TV cooking, and I mean,
not fixing up a house, not decorating,
right? And opening a restaurant and a shopping complex and everything else. I mean, it's all part of a very carefully crafted business empire that the Gaines have, which I don't see really anything wrong with that. But I think that may be why it didn't get the kind of attention someone else might get.
Well, Janet, I look forward to hearing about cookbooks with you on the Zest. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having me. I look forward to it, too.
We've got to go, but come back to the table next week. We'll be talking to the best-selling Southern writer, Rick Bragg. Visit us at thezestpodcast.com for recipes, and be sure to subscribe to The Zest on iTunes, Google Play, or wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Robin Sussingham. Dalia Colon and I produce The Zest with help from Mark Hayes and Craig George. The Zest is a production of WUSF Public Media.